Welcome to Scrolling to Death. I'm Nikki, and today I'm joined by Paul DelPonte, Executive Director of the National Crime Prevention Council. So welcome, Paul. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nikki. Great to be on your podcast. You've had some great people on, and I'm happy to be in their company.
Amazing. So what I thought we could do today, Paul, is give people a snapshot of sort of how we got here to a point where our children are accessing technology that can harm them. And when it does, we really can't do a damn thing about it, right?
I wouldn't go that far. I think we're starting to see some breaks in that armor.
Yes, absolutely. And so maybe we can start with describing the legislation that protects big tech from liability. So that would be Section 230, which was enacted in 96. And can you sort of tell listeners what Section 230 does?
Sure. So take you back to a minute to 1996, and the internet was emerging. Mm-hmm. And there was a conscious decision to let it flourish, see where it grows, let innovation bloom. Mm-hmm. And as a result, Section 230 basically says that internet companies, social media companies are not responsible for third-party content. So if I go on Facebook and say Mark Zuckerberg is a jerk, mm-hmm. they can't purposely take that down. It's designed to protect free speech in the spirit of letting the internet grow, letting it blossom, and see what develops. And then, of course, here we are 25 years later.
Mm-hmm. A few things have happened since then, like smartphones and social media taking over our lives.
Correct.
And also allowing our children into that online space that when that law was enacted, kids weren't using the internet.
It was very different then. Think back to the AOL dial-up modem and things in their infancy, the rise of e-commerce starting and people not sure where to go with it. Mm-hmm. And a lot has changed in 25 years, and that's to be expected.
Yeah. But what didn't happen is reform of Section 230. So
correct.
Why weren't we able to get any reform of Section 230 in the last 25 plus years?
Well, I think part of it is technology always advances quicker than our ability to regulate it. And let's put the internet and social media in the context of other industries. Take the automobile industry, for example. Mm-hmm. The first car rolls off the assembly line, and it just about worked. And then it was years later when Henry Ford developed the assembly line and started cranking out Model Ts, and then you started seeing cars pop up. And then people were like, oh my God, there's traffic all of a sudden, and we don't have any way of regulating it. So they came up with the concept of the red light and green light, and then later the yellow light. So there were three lights, and so you could better control things. Mm-hmm. And so that regulation takes a while to catch up, as well as the marketplace plays a factor in that. So not every automobile produced was successful. Mm-hmm. So you had the Edsel come out, and you could draw the equivalency of saying, okay, MySpace is the Edsel of social media. And then you advance, and then there's a demand by consumers. We want something better. We want something faster. We want something prettier. We want it cheap. And so Detroit developed the Corvair, which Ralph Nader made famous as unsafe at any speed. Mm-hmm. Similarly, venture capitalists said, okay, in the wake of the Ashley Madison collapse, well, maybe there's a platform that can help people cheat on their spouses better. And lo and behold, they funded venture capital for Snapchat. And so Snapchat is sort of like the Corvair of social media companies. If you're looking to cheat on your spouse, sell drugs or gamble or trade child porn, Snapchat's the place to be.
Wow. Well said. The benefits of Snapchat, I just don't see it there. What are your thoughts around why has Snapchat stayed around so long and flourished despite the obvious harms?
That's a darn good question. I think, there's no one simple answer for that. It hasn't turned a profit yet. So part of the reason,
right.
I think when you examine the culture behind social media and you talk about the need for reforming Section 230 and other things the government could do, can do, should do, mm-hmm. you also have to look at the marketplace, the people who fund the startups, the venture capital. Just because you can fund something, just because you can build something doesn't mean you should. And I don't think that question gets asked enough in Silicon Valley. And I think that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is there needs to be a greater influx of corporate responsibility. And I think one of the centers back when the hearing with all the CEOs were called in to task in Washington. I forget which senator, but made the point very eloquently that this is an industry that just seems impossible of self-regulating.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And usually in the US, we don't like to overregulate, but we also don't like to underregulate. But when regulation works best, it's usually because you have government coming to the table with industry and figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
And in this instance, very sad to report that several of those CEOs only came to Washington because they were subpoenaed and brought there by U.S. Marshals. That's not a very good sign.
No. And they're creating products that they won't even give to their own children. What do you feel about that?
That's an issue. I think in terms of regulation, I think there are a lot of things that we have to look at. It's not all just Section 230. There was a very serious report by the U.S. Surgeon General, equivalent to the Surgeon General's report in the 1960s on bringing to the public forefront the dangers of tobacco.
Right.
We took steps along the way. We stopped advertising commercials aimed at children and tobacco products.
Mm-hmm.
The social media platforms, a lot of them say you have to be 13 to show up. But if you look at their advertising, if you look at what's on their web pages, they have children far younger than 13 on there.
Right.
So, there needs to be, I think that's something that the FCC and the FTC should look at. Something that Congress should look at is how are they advertising?
Mm-hmm.
If you say you don't want them for children and the children don't belong there, and if you have a platform that you yourself don't want your children on, yet you're picturing 7-year-olds in your advertising, there's something hypocritical about that and it needs to stop.
Right. I mean, Snapchat's latest ad, Less Social Media, More Snapchat, was a cartoon. I mean, it was blatantly targeted to young teens and kids.
I'm not sure who that ad was targeted to because
I don't understand it at all.
It puddles me, I just tell you.
Did you see it got rated #1 least effective by Forbes?
I did not see that. I did notice that it did not make anybody's list of best ads on the Super Bowl. And someone who's been in our organization has been in the business of producing ads for 40 years. And the point of the ad escaped me because if it was aimed at trying to get more users, it didn't seem to be doing that. If it was aimed at trying to address some of the concerns that critics have of the platform, it certainly didn't do that.
No.
It only made that worse. So I'm not sure what the point of the ad was.
I know. I'm flabbergasted. And Paul, you worked with a couple other groups on creating a response ad. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. Well, the day we got wind that they were going to air the ad first on the Grammy Awards ceremony, we were having a meeting in our office here in D.C. with the incredible Amy Neville of the Alexander Neville Foundation. We were meeting with
Love her.
She's got a youth group, and we were actually testing out one of our new ad campaigns with the youth group. Mm-hmm. We saw a copy of the Snap ad, and we saw it, and we had the same reaction you and others had after seeing it, and said, well, we need to do something. And we quickly put together a response ad that sort of mocks what they were trying to do and brings it to real light. I mean, the point of any ad, a corporate ad, is to put your company's best face forward.
Right.
But the reality is, we juxtapose their ads with people who have been part of our livesproject.org, which is our digital remembrance quilt. Mm-hmm. And, it just saddens me every time we get a new square to the quilt to add.
Right.
The most recent one was 15. Again, fake pill laced with fentanyl bought on a social media platform. Mm-hmm. I'd like to say there's a great variety in the hundreds and hundreds of people who posted on the quilt, mm-hmm. but the stories are just hauntingly familiar.
Right. And it's normal people and normal kids like yours and mine. That's what I've found so
it is
heartbreaking is it could be my kid in a few years.
It could be, a 14-year-old isn't capable of making those decisions. A 14-year-old might be going through a bad point in their week, in their month, mm-hmm. and they talk to a friend, and the friend says, "Hey, you could probably get a Xanax or something." Well, I can't get that. I have to go to my doctor. No, you can't. You can get it right on social media. Mm-hmm. And they look, and lo and behold, they do it, and 2 days later, it's at their doorstep, and the stories are just, like I said, hauntingly familiar, hauntingly similar.
Mm-hmm.
It's the child waits for the parents to go to bed. They go to their room. They take the pill. The next morning, they don't wake up. And then there's the family.
Yeah.
Their life turned upside down in the safest place that they thought their child could be, in their own bedroom, where, once upon a time and not too long ago, they read them bedtime stories. When you're talking a 12 or 14-year-old, that's still at the stage where you're tucking your kids in at night.
Yeah.
And to see that lost in an instant, and to see society not doing enough to stop it is really what we need to start changing the mindset around.
Right. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the legislation and legal cases that are going on now. But one thing I want to talk about too is parents have to take some control. Like, these big tech companies aren't looking out for our kids. So within our own home, there are decisions that we can make just to be safer, delaying the use of smartphones for our kids, delaying the use of social media, using safer phones like the Bark phone, monitoring their activity. Do you have any other tips around that for parents as far as what we can take control of?
There are. I mean, I think part of it is, society is creating one set of expectations on our kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool to have a smartphone. And to some extent, a smartphone is a valuable tool. It can be a valuable tool when used properly. It's not that a smartphone is inherently bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's that there are bad people around us. I often get the question, well, you're critical of some social media platforms, yet you have McGruff the Crime Dog very visible on those platforms. Why is that? Isn't that hypocritical? I said, no, McGruff is there because kids are there and criminals are there, and anywhere there are kids and criminals, McGruff needs to be there. You need some mechanism to help monitor, help keep things safe, and be a reminder, be an educational tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are tools out there that parents can use, but I think the bigger change we have to make as a society in our mindset
Mm-hmm.
is similar to back when seatbelts first came around. And again, another analogy to the auto industry. But when you talk about safety, basically behind a projectile with a lot of horsepower.
Yeah.
And so that you need some things there to protect you. Everybody likes the advantage and the freedom and the benefits automobiles provide, similar to the advantages and benefits smartphones, social media, and new technology are providing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there need to be some safety mechanism, as well as we need to shift what public expectations are around safety.
Mm-hmm.
The notion that somebody can develop a new social media platform, and if it looks cute, and Snapchat looks cute, it's got all the little funny things you can put around your face, and that kind of thing, and maybe people enjoy it, that's clear.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we're learning the unintended consequences and some of the dangers around it. So there need to be safeguards of it, but those safeguards only take root if we get to the deeper understanding of it. Just like seatbelts didn't take hold because there was legislation mandating seatbelts, but there was a change of consciousness realizing that no parent would put their kid in a car without a seatbelt, and effective public service advertising around, okay, your kid is going to learn from your example. And we also see that with smartphones. Parents who text and drive are sending a message to their kids that it's okay. We have to, be more conscious of these things and what we're doing as adults and what we're imparting to our kids. If you hand a kid a smartphone, you got to be careful. You mentioned some of the pending legislation. I'm a little skeptical of the legislation that puts too much onus on parents and too much onus on these age verifications.
Yeah.
And the point I'll look at, and we do a lot of work partnering with the folks who do safe ID check programs and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. The reality is it's easy to skirt those.
Okay.
And it's easy to skirt them in person at a liquor store.
Right. Where
police could shut that store down. Just imagine how easy it's going to be when you have this in every kid's hand, and your parent can't be there 24/7 every time they're holding it.
Yeah.
There are ways to get around anything, and I have not been convinced that there is a system in place to the, you alluded to, it's been 25 years since Section 230. Why hasn't it been reformed? one of the reasons why is reform isn't that easy. Our system of government was set up to be slow on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to put a lot of energy into some ID system that most experts predict somebody's going to figure out a way to hack it within less than 6 months, you're not going to get a new piece of legislation through Congress in 6 months. That just doesn't happen.
Right.
So we do have to look at these proposals with an eye toward the future, with an eye toward, what is it going to do? What assurances is it actually going to protect?
Mm-hmm.
And, other ways to do that. I think one clear area that has to be opened up is to allow parents and others more remedies in the courts. And that, I think, is a fruitful area where Congress is exploring that. They're exploring that around the sale of items on the internet, as well as in making modifications to Section 230, what that will open up. And I think to some extent, judges are getting a little fed up. They're hearing from the public. Judges are responsible to the public too. I think in some of the court cases, what we're seeing and what we're hearing is that public frustration being voiced from a judge.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And ultimately, a jury is going to come back and start handing down some verdicts that are going to make people's heads shake.
Yeah. How do you feel about the Neville versus Snap case and how that's going so far? So there's a group of families suing Snap Inc.
Yes.
because most of their children passed away after purchasing a pill off of Snapchat that was laced with fentanyl, and they had fentanyl poisoning and died.
In fact, there are approximately 50 families who joined on to the suit by Aaron and Amy Neville for their son, Alexander, who passed away at age 14 from a pill he bought on Snapchat. And
right.
A family just like yours, mine, and any other family, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
But I think what's happened, and it's still in the very early stages in terms of pretrial motions, but there is a certain consistency which the judge seems to have taken in the case, and that is these people came to the courthouse seeking to be heard, and they should be heard. Mm-hmm. And if I was Snapchat, I'd be very nervous about that because I've heard these stories. There is no parent. I've shared them with friends. I've talked to others who aren't in the crime prevention business, just regular people.
Yeah.
There's nobody who hears one of these stories and doesn't feel there's something wrong with the system that allowed that to happen.
Right.
And I think if this plays through its conclusion, and so far Snapchat has been almost completely unsuccessful in getting their pretrial motions approved,
right,
that a jury's going to hear that. And you're going to have 12 people of their peers who are going to go into a room and they're going to discuss this. I've talked to these parents. I've seen the documentaries. I've read stories. I've been, on expert panels and all of that. And just hearing it directly from a parent, there's no other if you are not moved and shaken by some of these stories, I would question someone's humanity. So I cannot imagine a jury going through weeks of hearing from 50 families.
I know.
The similarity of these stories and not come away with the conclusion that, maybe Snapchat didn't sell them the drugs directly, but they sure let it happen.
Right.
And this isn't right. And as a member, as one of 12 citizens in this country, I'm going to do what I can to try to stop it. And that coming back with a big jury award so the company feels some financial pain.
Right. So what would happen, do you think, if Snap was found at fault here?
I think if Snap is found at fault, I think you're going to see something approaching some of the major jury awards that we have seen around some of the drug companies and OxyContin. I think it is going to be of that proportion. Very large, historic. And in that case, you were dealing with people who became addicted because they were prescribed a drug, yet the prescription, the method of promoting the drug to doctors, encouraged doctors to prescribe it. That was and that came back with incredible dollar awards. Here you're going to have an instance where what the plaintiffs are arguing is that Snap needs to be held responsible because they built a system and an algorithm and all these other things that connected a drug dealer to their very young children. And like I said, I just can't imagine being a parent on that jury and not realizing this has got to stop.
Because I don't know that all parents realize how The disappearing message functionality allows the drug dealers to anonymously have those conversations, but also that your child can, in one click, share their exact location with this drug dealer. It's just the
Absolutely.
perfect setting for a drug deal.
It just makes one's head shake and wonder if, in fact, did somebody have some drug dealers in a focus group in designing the platform? I got to wonder sometimes. You're correct in that people don't understand that. There is this tendency to lump all social media together. It's all the same thing, but there are distinct differences between the platforms, what they're designed to do, the type of market they're going for. If you're going to sell drugs, you're not going to create an account on Etsy. But if you're going to sell arts and crafts, that's the place to go.
Right.
It's they each have different marketing targets.
Well, and you are probably aware of why Evan Spiegel and his frat brothers started Snapchat in the beginning, which was called Peekaboo, and it was to share sex and nude photos back and forth and have them disappear.
Correct. And I think, like I said, it was sort of in the downfall of Ashley Madison when you think about it. And now what we're seeing in terms of, you layer onto that in the last couple of years, the growth of artificial intelligence and the ability to, there's been a significant crackdown on child porn and its transfer electronically. But what about AI kiddie porn? The number of scary things that are happening.
Yeah, I often share stories on my Instagram and YouTube about it's usually teen boys who are taking photos of teen girls in their school and using AI to remove clothes and then share them around. And even worse, child sexual abuse material being created of younger children's images.
Younger children, that leading to stalking, violence, and committed on an innocent child who just happened to be in the school gymnasium or wherever.
We've had such a shift. A few years ago, everyone was sharing photos of their babies and their children every single day, in bathtubs. And then now I'm seeing a movement of parents. They're no longer feeling comfortable sharing photos of their children on social media because of these issues.
That is correct. I think, I think a lot of things, we've got to be more cautious of it.
Yeah.
To some extent, it's a shame. I think, the ability to share photos of your kids as they're growing up with grandparents and other relatives who might be hundreds of miles, thousands of miles away certainly has a benefit, but making sure that we do that in a safe way.
Yeah. We use personally shared albums on our iPhones, and then we just add family members to that. So it keeps it off and out of the big tech platforms' hands. Sure, it's on Apple's cloud, but I feel is less risky for me personally.
Right.
So despite the monetary win that may be in the hands of the parents, if Snap is held liable in this case, Neville versus Snap, do you think it will result in some changes in the platform, some forced changes?
One, Snap will appeal whatever decision it is, which goes to the lack of sincerity that Evan Spiegel, the CEO, made in front of all those parents. If you're so sorry, why were you in court just a few days before that trying to have some of these families pick up your legal charge from what you believe is an unfair lawsuit? There's a certain Orwellian principle at work there, but beyond that, so we can pretty much predict that Snap will appeal whatever decision is made, and that will take years, and that will frustrate the families further, and maybe Snap will go out of business by then, because I can't imagine Wall Street will react favorably to a large jury award, and so that could put Snap in financial jeopardy.
Okay.
The other thing about a civil trial is that there's a discovery process, and things become public. And I can guarantee you that there are many federal officials, state officials, who are closely taking a look at Snapchat and this trial, and they will comb through each piece of evidence that is presented in the process of discovery, and very well could lead to some criminal action.
Right. Wow. Okay. It's going to be an interesting couple of years.
It will. And it will be probably, you look at the appeal process and other things that will happen in between, it will be a few years.
Right. Okay. So there's 200 plus school districts also suing these social media companies for increased expenses due to having to deal with the mental health issues of their students. What do you think of those lawsuits?
It's going to be part of a growing issue where different authorities are going to look at what's going on with social media and are going to make these broader class actions and create broader classes. I think, as we look at where those types of actions has been most successful, it's when the state attorneys general take something on. I know I've spoken to a number of attorney generals in a couple different states, sort of looking at the sale of fake pills on different social media platforms, as well as some of these other things. Mm-hmm. And, it presents I'm not a lawyer, and you get into some very complicated legal theories and other things along the way. But I think there is a certain validity in it. And what you're seeing now, depending on whether or not they're successful or not, obviously, if they're successful, expect a lot more of it. Even if they're unsuccessful, I think we can expect more.
Okay. Right. So things are changing. We're seeing a shift. We're seeing a lot of organizations and people stand up and say we're not okay with how things have been going and how our children have been harmed. So overall, we're heading in the right direction, you would say?
I think we are increasing to raise awareness. Mm-hmm. And raising awareness is always the first step for meaningful change. Mm-hmm. And, part of it is things happen so quickly. I was one of the first people who started speaking about fake pills being sold on social media. And that was just less than 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was one of the first conferences that opened back up after COVID at the American Public Health Association and raised it. And then the next day I got back to my office and I got a call from the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, saying, we heard your speech. Let's talk. Our administrator just started talking publicly about this too.
Wow.
That was just 3 years ago.
Right.
So if 4 years ago, if I had told you fake pills with fentanyl, you probably would have given me a blank look. You wouldn't have heard about it. Mm-hmm. So the speed at which that has accelerated from where it was to becoming the leading cause of death of teenagers and young adults in the span of 3 years is mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. And part of that, you can't escape the fact that something of that proportion could have only happened with the aid and assistance of technology, not just social media technology, but across the board. Sophisticated supply chains, import and export, different rules that need to be changed. There's something called the de minimis rule that allows a package worth less than $500 to not go through the traditional border customs, sort of like when you're flying back from another country and you do your customs declaration. If you spend less than $500, you don't have to declare it. So that same principle is being used with packages that are being shipped. Mm-hmm. And if you think about, there's a lot of talk about, well, if we shut down the border, we'd be able to stop fentanyl. A lethal dose of fentanyl is just 2 milligrams. It can fit on the tip of this pen, enough to kill someone. You can't secure a border that tightly. Most of the fentanyl that's entering its way into the U.S. is coming in container ships in what appear to be legal transportations. Mm-hmm. You can put a sizable amount of fentanyl that has quite a bit of lethal potency in a package that might contain sweaters and something else. And, it's just, and then that enters the U.S. and then you have a whole supply chain of drug dealers who pick it up, distribute it, create different screen personas on Snapchat, move on to the next one. Somebody's Cash App on their phone makes the transaction happen, and it shows up at their doorstep. And it happens that quickly.
And did this happen because they're using fentanyl? It's cheap, but it's also very addictive. Is that the reason they want kids?
That is correct. I when I first started looking at this, I'm like, I started asking myself, why would
they do this?
Even somebody as diabolical as a drug dealer want to kill their customers because they won't. But it's a law of averages. It's cheap to make, so there's a high profit margin. And it is highly addictive. And the fact that it's highly addictive outweighs the fact that it can also be highly lethal in a drug dealer's eyes. So if they can addict somebody, even though they think they're buying Xanax or Adderall or any number of legitimate name prescription drugs, they're buying a fake pill that does not contain any of the active ingredients. And it could contain a lethal dose of fentanyl. But from the drug dealer's mind, okay, well, if they don't die, which, they look at the law of averages, they're going to get addictive. Mm-hmm. And they're going to know that my Adderall works better than the other Adderall they took. And it's not working better. It's because the fentanyl has addicted them.
Wow. Okay, so for parents, I talked to Sam Chapman recently, and he gave some good tips for parents. One being, you have to inform your kids they cannot ever take a pill that is not prescribed to them by a doctor with their name on the bottle.
Correct.
And if you have teenagers or preteens, you need to have, especially with cell phones, you need to have Narcan in your home. Is there any other tips for parents just to be aware of, and if God forbid this ever happens?
Talk to your kids.
Yeah.
A question I get is, well, isn't my child too young to hear this? The answer to that is simply no. If you're asking yourself that question, it's not too early to have that conversation.
Okay.
Tell them about why, and if you describe things, even when your child's younger, the first thing you do within the first few weeks of bringing your child home from the hospital is you visit the pediatrician. The pediatrician becomes a stable force in your life. Use that to your advantage when you talk to the child. Just like, hey, when you got that bad sinus infection and we went to see the doctor and the doctor wrote a prescription and mommy and daddy went to the drugstore to pick it up and they put grape flavor in it so you would drink it, put it in the terms that a child understands it, that's relatable in their life. The reason why we had to go see the doctor is to make sure that we got something that made you better. And the reason you go to the drugstore is that the drugstore makes sure that medicine is safe for you to take. And if you're buying something from a stranger you don't know, these are serious medicines. And if it's not safe, it can really hurt you, maybe even kill you. And it's okay to tell a child that in terms they understand. It's important to. Like I said, it just breaks our heart each time we get another submission to the Lives Project. And, they're a teenager. They're a young teenager.
Yeah.
So it's not too early to have that conversation.
And the way that you posed it there is perfect. There's nothing inappropriate about saying that, hey, you're only allowed to take medication that is given to you by a doctor that we got from the drugstore, or if it's over the counter, it's given to you by me.
Right.
Right? You can't take medication that you're given by your friends. I mean, it could be unsafe.
Right, because you don't know where it came from.
Right.
And I think as somebody gets older, they can hear more sophisticated reasons why.
Sure.
I think one of the things that our research is showing is a lot of people don't realize, they just think of the immediacy of a drug dealer making a few bucks selling a drug, and they don't make the international connection to it. And that the sale of fake drugs, the sale of all fake products, is funding a criminal enterprise. Part of it is, why would anybody think that buying a pill on a social media site that you should really, maybe even if your doctor prescribes it, in a lot of instances, these are very strong medicines. You might even want to get a second opinion before you start taking that drug. So why would you trust somebody on a platform that you don't know, you don't see, and you don't know where they are, and they can just send you a drug? So it's not a logical decision, yet people are doing it. Part of it is we became accustomed to, okay, I bought a pair of sneakers. Yeah, I know they were fake, but the real ones were $500, so close enough.
Yeah.
And okay, you could say that's okay with a pair of sneakers, but even that pair of sneakers, it was made abroad without any environmental safeguards, without any child protection labor laws, and you're putting money into that. And then so the companies that are making fake products, these cartels, thinking, okay, where's my next area of expansion? All right, I tapped out on the sneaker market. Hey, how about fake drugs? I heard you can make a lot of money on that. So part of it is, as a country, we became conditioned to thinking it's okay. But there's one thing all fake products have in common. They're all illegal. And very seldom does somebody who's making fake goods break just one law. It's just, they're not just violating IP law. There's generally money laundering going on. There are other trademark infractions. There is child labor. There's a whole host of things that when prosecutors do break up one of these rings, they're not just charging them on intellectual property. There's a whole host of charges.
Okay.
And we're really starting to realize how dangerous the counterfeit business is.
Okay. You have kids?
I do.
Are they teenagers or how old are they?
They are teenagers, 18 and 15.
And how do they feel about Snapchat?
They don't use Snapchat. They are both very creative and avid users of social media. One of the younger one wants to be an influencer and has a channel, is very successful at it, in fact.
Yeah.
But is aware, knows what I do, knows what I
right.
stand. Snapchat doesn't have a utility for them. It doesn't do what they want. Unfortunate, they're both very bright kids and
Yeah.
do very well in school and all that and have ambitions, and realize, I think part of it is what I try to impart is that, these are tools. Delay as long as possible the peer pressure to give them an electronic device to make sure that they were old enough to be responsible with it.
Yeah.
And to some extent, as a single parent, it was important that they each had their own cell phone.
Yeah.
Because if I needed to get them quickly, they knew to call me. But part of it, I think, was imparting the responsibility of why they were having something like that.
Right.
And like I said, I'm not, it's not the technology that's to blame. It's what you do with it. It's what you teach them to do with it.
And I think you, when giving a smartphone, for example, really thinking about what functionality do they need? Because we do have tools now, like safer smartphones, that really limit the amount of functionality to calling or just the geolocator so you know where they are. There's new tools now that make
absolutely,
and you can start adding other apps as they get older, and so I'm a big fan of that. And then I think that your story, Paul, is a testament to how important it is to have the conversations and educate your kids if they're going to have access to screens and smartphones and social media, that they know the harms. And in your case, because of what you do, I'm sure your kids are aware of what could happen. And so when they see maybe a predator contacting them or a drug dealer, they know already what that is likely going to lead to and to avoid it.
That is. I think one of the scarier things out there, and this is a point I try to make as often as I can when I talk to a parent group or a youth group or anything. When we were young, if you had a friend or someone who you knew was using drugs and they had to make a drug deal, it was always done in this sort of seedy environment.
Right.
It was in a back alley. It was behind a building. It was dark. There was a certain fear to it. That's gone. It's done anonymously on your phone screen, money sent through a cash app, and the package arriving at your doorstep. Either it's being overnighted or they're dropping it off, or an Uber driver is dropping it off. The Uber driver doesn't know what they're dropping off. And, there's this anonymity to the whole process. And I think that has faked a lot of people into harm and death.
Yeah. The anonymity thing, maybe we have a separate discussion about cyberbullying and anonymity around that, because I think that can be a fascinating discussion as well.
I'd love to do that. In fact, it was McGruff the Crime Dog who coined the term cyberbully.
Really?
Yes.
Cool. Wow. I did not know that. I use it all the time.
McGruff has always been ahead of his time.
Thank you, McGruff. Let's start to close out. So tell me about your work with the National Crime Prevention Council and kind of what you guys are focused on.
The National Crime Prevention Council is the home of McGruff the Crime Dog, and we are focused on helping people realize that they can take a bite out of crime themselves. And one of the reasons why I first reached out to Amy Neville and some of the other families, this is a generation of people who, in fact, grew up with McGruff the Crime Dog and who were taking action. And that's really what the National Crime Prevention Council is all about. It's about helping people take action. McGruff is not a superhero. He's not out there stopping villains. He's out there educating people so that they can do it. And that's what we do. We are focused on a wide range of issues, all the scary things you read about in the headlines. We already talked a lot about fentanyl and fake drugs, but all fake products, violent crime, cyberbullying. We have resources on all of those. We have a child-friendly website, McGruff.org, which has games and other things you can learn. And what we discovered is parents probably like it just as much as the kids. So McGruff.org. Okay. Then our main website, NCPC.org, National Crime Prevention Council, is just chock full of information on any number of topics. If you think about it, we probably have something on it. And then, as I already talked about, liesproject.org. Take a visit there. I do encourage everybody to look at it and read through some of those stories, and then hug your children.
Yeah, and I do find, despite those stories being the most heartbreaking that you'll come across, reading and seeing these stories are what gets us to shift our thinking a little bit and just open up that line of conversation with our kids and hopefully protect them from those harms, right?
Absolutely. That's the intent. It was modeled after the AIDS quilt of the 1980s, which was a physical reminder that these were real people dying.
Right.
It was not just something you're reading about in the headlines. And that when you see these stories, you realize this child is just like my child. And that's what humanity is all about. It's about humanity is the fabric of life, and the quilt is that symbol of how we sew together as a global family. Says a lot about who we are as a people.
Yeah. And look out for each other, right? Because we're all the same, and we're all in this together. And right, their kids are just like our kids. And that's been a theme I think of every time I talk to another parent survivor whose kid has died from any of these harms. So Paul, thank you so much for everything that you do to help us support and protect our children. Just the awareness piece of knowing about these stories. And I hope that listeners go to McGruff.org and NCPC.org to find out more about your work. Also, you guys have active Instagram. Where can they follow you on social media?
They can follow us on all social media at McGruff NCPC.
Okay. And I like to suggest if your kid is old enough to have an Instagram, then they're old enough to follow accounts like McGruff's or accounts like mine. And
absolutely, we welcome them. We have a lot of fun things for kids. It's we have contests, we have things that we believe in edutainment. Learning can be fun.
Yeah, I agree. Paul, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate, again, everything you do for us.
Well, thank you. Please stay in touch. Pleasure to see a podcast like this taking off, and happy to be on anytime you want.
Thank you, Paul.